Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Making the Case webcast. I am Lacey Gaitan, the Senior Director of Content and Learning, and we are thrilled that you are here with us today. As everyone comes into the webcast, we'll take you through a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. So first, we want to let you know that we have turned on transcription for today. If you need to change how you see the transcript, hide the subtitles, view it in full, or change any of your settings, at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there is a little area that should say live transcript. And if you hover near that, there's a caret that you can click on to view the options and change your settings as needed. Also today, we will be using chat throughout, so feel free to use that function to chat with all of the attendees. Make sure when you go into the chat function, you click all panelists and attendees so everyone can see your responses. And then we will use the Q&A feature as well for questions throughout. So we'll be taking questions at the end of each section, as well as at the end of today's call. If someone asks a question that you are also particularly interested in, please use the thumbs up icon to upvote that question. It helps us know that that's a question that we should prioritize in answering. So we also wanted to share with you some other upcoming events that we have that you can take advantage of. On March 8th, we will be hosting an information session for our upcoming forum, which is an intensive program for participants in their first 1 to 5 years in the corporate social responsibility field that really gives attendees a broad view of what the field is and all the different aspects of it. It's an 8-week program that takes place every Wednesday from 1 to 4 p.m. Eastern in the afternoons. And then we also have upcoming summits. Our first one will take place on March 30th and 31st, where we will be talking about ESG. And a better understanding of that for practitioners who are, transitioning into ESG or taking on added ESG responsibilities from their CSR roles. So we hope you'll join us at another upcoming event, and you can learn all about those and other opportunities with ACCP at our website. And now, I'm thrilled to introduce you to Carolyn Berkowitz, our President and CEO, who will be talking to us about our Making the Case Toolkit today and the resources that you can use as you review it. So I'll turn it over to Carolyn now.
Thank you, Lacey. It is a treat for me to be here with you. This is a product that we developed 3 years ago, and it's something that we are really proud of and that the whole team has worked on, and I can't wait to share it with you. I'm working with Sarah Cable behind the scenes, who will be advancing slides. So every once in a while, when we're not 100% already in sync or she can't read my mind, I'll let her know to advance the slide, which we can move forward now, Sarah. Thank you. I think we all know and understand, both intuitively and through our own experiences, that businesses need to simultaneously do good and do less harm. And so I like to think about doing good as some of the ways that we spend our money or engage our resources, and doing less harm as ways that we make our money. And it's the way that the two intersect with one another where there's real power. The market demands that we prove ourselves each and every day to be a force for social and environmental good. And especially as we're experiencing the generational shifts in the workplace. So we're being measured by the total positive impact on people and the planet. And our intent behind this product or program is to provide you with the ample information that will help you engage your employers in active support of your work. And so to gain support and resources, we wanted to arm you, if you will, with compelling data-driven information for your case. Making the Case is one single resource, and as you can see on this slide, it's one single resource that compiles data from 30 different sources to make a comprehensive CSR and ESG case. All of the data was published in either 2020 or 2021, so it is the most relevant and new data. All are well-respected sources, surveys, and information. And in the back of the Making the Case Toolkit, which you can download if you haven't already, you'll see the bibliography, and you can link either in the data itself to the source, or you can go to the bibliography, see all the others, and link to all those sources. So both the specific data that we've included in this toolkit is important, but also the opportunity for you to look beyond and to dig into some of the things that we dug into as we determined what to include. So as you'll see on the next slide, I think the theme for this year is the idea of interconnectivity. And it may be a word that we made up, but the idea of it is sound, and you'll hear it used in a lot of places. As we think about the driving trends in corporate responsibility that will sustain the change and will help you all realize your commitments, we need to each understand the connections among all of the trends and all of the activities that are going on. The work is by definition both connected and integrated throughout the business as it engages and impacts the groups of stakeholders. So we think about things like interconnections between business and consumers, between corporations and employees, between employees and their communities, between the issues, racial justice and environmental justice, climate change and the economy, and the list goes on and on. So what we know is that the work can't be siloed in one department, and your work won't survive if it is treated as a zero-sum game in competition with some of these other things. It is really important, and your job requires that you advocate for those connections, because that's where the rich magic is in all of this work. And I'll close up this slide by saying that in Gallup's report, The State of the Workplace 2021, they use the quote, "Making the world better begins at work." And I think for so many of us, it does. And now if we go on to the next slide, you can see both the report is organized by stakeholders, but this gives you a sense of the variety of stakeholders out there. We've organized into 4 different stakeholder groups. There are obviously more. We have consumers and the community as one, employees as another, CEOs, C-suite leaders, and boards as another, and investments as the last. And for each of these, we want to present you with information that comes from their perspective. So what do each of these stakeholders think and believe, but also to shed light on the pressures that they are getting from other stakeholders or others. And then I think finally we'll turn to some benchmarking data, because that is also critical as you think about making your case, to understand what others are doing, to present what others are doing, and to see sort of how you stack up and what makes sense for you. So we'll move to the first stakeholder group, which is consumers and the community. The slide that you're looking at right now really speaks to reputation and how consumers make decisions about buying and not buying, and ultimately about the enormous amount of forgiveness that consumers are willing to exert when a company that is good in their minds makes a mistake. So you can see that 44% of those under the age of 30 really do strongly agree that they try to support brands that have the purpose of making a difference. 48% of Americans say that they will speak out against or boycott those companies that don't actively address social justice issues. And 73% of Americans are willing to forgive a purpose-driven company if they make a mistake, which all adds up to, it really does, the reputation overall matters. Moving on to employees, I'm going to spend quite a bit of time here because I think right now this is such a critical issue for us all. You can see at the top of the slide the notion of the belief-driven employee, which is a person who wants to work for a company that is a good corporate citizen, that allows them to get involved in the community, and that behaves in a socially responsible way. And so more and more employees are following this profile of being belief-driven. Employees want to work in companies that are good corporate citizens, even if it requires trade-offs like lower pay. And so there's a stat that I'll share with you that is not on this slide, but is in the report. 49% of consumers say they would be willing to accept a lower salary to work for an organization that they consider to be socially responsible. So you can see 72% of employees are more likely to apply for a job in a company that's socially responsible. Millennials are willing to forego 14.4% of expected comp in order to work at a socially responsible company. And this data on this third box on the right is even before the Great Resignation, but more than half of employees are open to leaving their company for new roles. But it drops to less than 12% if they believe that their company has a meaningful impact on society. So when you think about all of this data, and specifically recruiting, I think it is really important data to share with HR, but also to share with literally every business line leader for whom talent is the holy grail, which right now is every business leader. Stats like these speak to including the social responsibility profile in your talent brand, to developing and implementing employee engagement strategies using this work, to make a powerful case for why a question ought to be included in the annual survey, and then finally to institute and support corporate culture initiatives. So I'll go on to the next slide, which talks a little bit about retention. It isn't enough for a company to just do this work. It's really important that companies engage their employees in doing this work. So one of the things that just really struck me is that 96% of employees say that volunteering in community is essential to them. And that's a pretty strong word, essential, and 96 is almost all. And 77% say that company-sponsored volunteer activities are essential to their well-being. So what's the difference? There's volunteering in general, and then there's company-sponsored. There's a couple of other stats on this page that I think are really critical that affect retention. So 43% are reconsidering their job because it isn't doing enough to address social justice issues externally. That I think is really important. And 55% of employees agree that racism has already damaged their relationship with their employer. So again, when we think about the interconnectivity among all of the various functions, this is really important. We have a couple of questions, and I want to open it up following these two sections for any others. The answer is yes, we are able to share these slides after the presentation, but you can also download the report that has these statistics and others. Do we know if, I'm going to defer to Lacey and see whether or not we know whether that particular stat is on paid volunteerism only, or is it any company-sponsored volunteerism? I think it's any company-sponsored volunteerism.
It was company sponsored.
Yeah. So could be paid and could may also not be paid. So before I go on, I'll just see whether anybody else has any questions on anything in here on what we've covered thus far. And if not, we can keep going. All righty. So we'll move now to CEOs and C-suite leaders and boards. So this slide actually speaks to, again, the sentiments of the top leaders in corporations. And then in the next slide, we'll get to what the expectations that they are feeling or that others are placing on them. And together, they're really fundamental for making your case. So 87% of CEOs have said that purpose is central to building their brand reputation. And 91% of business leaders believe that their company has a responsibility to act on ESG issues. So I think it's really important to understand from these two stats and others in the report that that CEOs already understand this. They are already inclined, which is a really important thing to know as you make your case. I think it's critical to think about all of the issues in all of the previous slides as data for them, but it's an important time to make the case because you know that they are inclined. And when we think about which stakeholders CEOs prioritize, you can see that customers, employees, and community are in the top three. And pardon me about my dog, she just might do that. And it's a pretty far distance down to shareholders. And so there is also connections between customers, employees, communities, even consumers and shareholders. Obviously, it is keeping those folks those stakeholders at the top happy that will deliver for shareholders. But when you are thinking about how to tap into your CEO's motivations, know that they understand their responsibility and that this group of stakeholders is really critically important to them. So in terms of what they are hearing from the market on the next slide, I want to, we can go, yep, great. I want to start by literally reading you the headline on this slide because I think it is that important. Most stakeholders expect leadership from CEOs on social issues, and business leaders who don't engage will face the consequences from the marketplace. That is critical, and it's critical for your folks to know that. So the stats on this slide show what folks want from companies. 86% of stakeholders expect CEOs to prioritize societal engagement in addition to profits. And 66% say CEOs should take the lead on change rather than the government imposing that change on them. It always makes a difference once the government has imposed the change, there's no recognition for the leadership involved. It becomes you followed that because you had to, whether or not it's something that you believe in. And so it is always, always, always better to beat those requirements or regulations in terms of the things that you do socially. And then in that middle stat, it's really important to see that investors expect the board of directors to oversee ESG topics, and the top two are employee health and safety and social issues in their community. both of these are part of the S in ESG. So I'll stop again and see whether anybody has any questions that they want to ask specifically about CEOs, C-suite leaders, boards, etc. So I think a word on ESG and the market. I think when you are making your case to CEOs, money obviously talks. Outperforming the rest of the market is really significant. But the CSR work will only have the intended financial impact if it is aligned with material issues. And so when you think about what matters to the company, your social impact work needs to address those things. So thinking about things, financial impact, regardless of your industry, there are just some that are for all companies. The turnover issue, or customer acquisition and retention, or leadership development, or reputation, ESG rankings and ratings, all of those things are things that matter financially to a company. And when you overlay that with the issues of materiality of your company, your work will have far more financial impact. So now we can go on to investors. Social is a big one. Investors are considering ESG mainstream. Mainstream expectation for their portfolios, both individual and institutional. And you can see that investments are growing at an enormously significant rate. But social climbed to the most important ESG priority in 2020, which is not surprising. Social within ESG means a whole bunch of different things. It definitely encompasses the community's well-being. It definitely encompasses many of the partners that you all might have in foundations or in nonprofits, but it also includes DEI, it includes human rights record, it includes employee engagement, it includes supplier diversity. All of these things are part of the S, and you can see why it's so important now to investors. 93% expect companies that they invest in to increase their prioritization of ESG initiatives, and 83% of personal investors will lobby their fund managers, or invest or divest, or change their investment mixes based on social responsibility and or environmental sustainability. So just like with buying, it impacts consumer behavior, so does it impact investor behavior. Moving on to the next slide. Oh, I'll stop here actually if anybody wants to talk about investors before we go on. Okay, so CSR benchmarking is something that we all want to understand as we think about how we stack up and compare to others. And these things can both be used to share when you are behind the 8 ball, or share when you are on, in lockstep with that, to understand about your particular industries. But we'll start by saying that 59% of companies invest between 1% and 5% of their revenue in CSR programs. And I'm looking at the question you have, Carolyn. Actually, we do, we have a stat on that on the next page, so I will absolutely share that. The ratio between management costs and program costs to cash contributions is 9.8% as a median. 88% of companies are keeping their CSR headcount flat or increasing. And in 2020, racial equity giving from corporations jumped to 79% from 6%. So let me say that one again. Of all the funding in racial equity, 6%, is this, I'm just making sure, Lacey, if that's true, that 6% of it was from corporations prior to 2020. And in 2020, 79% of the funding for racial equity was from corporations, which is just a big, huge change. When we think about the concerns of CSR leaders, and I suspect that you all feel this, the top three concerns are, do we have adequate budget and resources for this? Are we gaining awareness for our CSR, or how do we gain awareness for our CSR? And how do we shift our strategy on a dime to respond to the ongoing changes? So let's move to the next benchmarking slide. And I'm going to start this slide by giving some props to CECP, which is a close partner of ACCP, for their longstanding and great work on giving in numbers. And some of the data, both on the last slide and this slide, come from giving in numbers. It's absolutely one of the studies that we source some of this work through. But I did want to share that last year, 2021 was the first year that we partnered with CECP, which was their data for 2020. And we are now going into a second year of partnership with them on the data that companies are working on right now for 2021 to be published towards the end of this year. So I do encourage you, if you have gotten the Giving in Numbers survey, I encourage you to participate. It helps the entire field for you to do so. And it is really how we, as a field, compare ourselves with one another and understand what we ought to be striving for. So this slide is really about some of the nitty-gritty on the benchmarking. The long-term priority shifts last year were racial justice and racial equity, vaccines, and food insecurity. And this relates to the two stats on the bottom right. The top challenge, according to all donors, for the world to solve is hunger, which is up 6% from 2020 to 40%. And the percentage of companies as a top priority decreasing, the most significant was in education, which decreased from 53% to 22% last year. So you can sort of see that as hunger went up, education went down. Not necessarily a correlation, but something interesting to think about. You can also see that disaster relief saw a significant increase in donations, over $9 million. And this is where it gets to the team size. 77% saw no change in the size of their team, 15% increased in the size of their team, and 8% decreased in the size of their team. So priorities are shifting, more money, new issues, and limited DEI expertise, and yet very little change in staff size. And you know, I think too often companies will expect us all to give away more money as if that's the end of or the only important thing when it comes to doing great CSR work. But as with any portfolio, we can only do a great job at so many things. And it really does require that we have more people with different expertise and different experience to manage all of these shifts and the increasing spend actually in corporate social responsibility and with external partners. Anybody have questions at this point? As you're thinking about that, I can go on to the last slide here, which is what we are calling the 4 C's that are required in 2022, which we hope this report will help you with. The first is commitment. So getting the commitment from your company, using this report to get that buy-in, to get that commitment to understand the kinds of resources and the experience and education that they need in order to do this work and do this well is vital. I talked a lot about connection among the stakeholders, connection among the issues, both internal and external. It is all about interconnectivity with the different groups and your peer organizations and with the external issues. Consequence, the difference that you make needs to be consequential to your company for it to have the intended impact. So understanding what the material consequence is of the things you do, looking and connecting directly to your company's materiality assessment if they have one. If they don't have one, thinking about doing one and understanding what the issues are that improve the business and connecting then your strategy to those. And then finally, the idea of communicating your story. The story in terms of the numbers and the statistics and the impact, but also the human connection stories and the employee stories that make such a difference to people. And so the connection literally among these 4 C's are really are the critical focus for our folks for the coming year. So I'm going to move on to questions, and I see we have one. So I think when you think about gaining customer and consumer awareness for your CSR efforts, I think partnering with your communications group obviously matters. Social media has far greater impact than we may think. And one of the things that I've found most effective is to make employees advocates for the work that you are doing. So when you engage your employees and then even feed them posts and work that or posts and communications that refer back to the work that you are doing, I think that tells the story. I talked with one company today who told me the story of a celebrity, a rapper, who, and this is a company that focuses on HIV pharmaceuticals. And there was a rapper that was behaving in a way that was homophobic and talking about AIDS in disparaging ways. And this company took the CSR work that they are doing and took their issue, which is material, and reached out via social media to this rapper and educated, quote unquote, out of love. And that 83 million people got a view into their work, what's important to them. And this rapper not only changed his tune, but is now a real advocate for the issues. So that's just one example that that I use that it actually, it fits in cause marketing and that question. It fits in, you know, what can you do to tell your story? Lacey, I'll ask if you have any other sort of examples of some cause marketing that folks might benefit from.
For the question around, how do you see tools like cause marketing overlapping with the work of CSR, and is it still seen as an effective tool? It is still definitely a tool that many companies are using to rally support for social causes, as was mentioned. I think this is where companies really need to understand, in the context of the ESG conversation, what is material to your business. And Carolyn, you were talking about this when you were talking about consequence and what is consequential to your business. And that really will help dictate if cause marketing is the right tool or effort that your business uses to support the social causes that are most important and impactful to your organization. And then we had another question, Carolyn, around—
Yeah, I see that, metrics.
Yeah.
So I think when I think about how to grow the CSR budget and resources, there are two issues. One is the external, and obviously I think you're talking about the internal for that. But I think benchmarking is a great way to make the case for for how much money you all are putting into communities through partners. And so when you look specifically at your industry, and I would take well, we have the data at our own fingertips. So Lacey can help us find it, or through the CECP report, you can benchmark against others in your industry and see what they are doing and giving. But when you think about your own resources, your staff resources, I think there is the data that I would take would be the increase. So if it costs, $5 to serve one partner, and you increase your budget or the number of partners by X%, then the staff portfolio gets bigger. So you wouldn't ask a portfolio manager to support X many more customers without increased resources. There's a ratio. And so I think you want to find all the things that could potentially make up the ratio of staff to partners, whether it is the number of markets, whether it is the number of employees, whether it is the number of partners. Now, as you think about the partnering work, it is more challenging and requires, more in-depth knowledge when you think about how do you engage the community differently. So it's a little bit slower work if you're doing the work of equitable grant making and doing that really well. It is understanding that money takes a long time to make a difference and turn a boat externally. So I think it's taking each of these pieces and putting it in the context of what the folks that you are talking about are most interested in. I would also work on having a minion of leaders that support your case. So if you're working with HR, what does it take with employee engagement? If you're working with the lines of businesses, what does it take to build reputation, to build your product knowledge, to engage with communities that will be impacted by your products and services, to recruit employees, all of those things. And it's really sort of the cocktail that you mix of this data that will help you make the case. And I would say finally, and this goes back to that first point, really understanding this many people, deploying this many dollars in community and having a portfolio of this many employees in market or for volunteering, that really does, I think it did for me, speak to management, because you can just show that growing the external amount or growing the number of programs the quality isn't going to be there if you are putting it all on the same number of people.
So we had another question come in about workplace giving and how that shows up in your overall giving.
Can you say more about that?
So Joy, would you want to share a little bit more about your question? And while we have that coming in, there was another question that came in around benchmarking numbers for full-time equivalent employees. And, you know, the question was specific to corporate communications and CSR. So while we don't have data on corporate communications, what I can share related to this question and the question Carolyn was just speaking to is that CACP's giving in numbers has really great benchmarking data on full-time equivalents. And there's data around like the median of recipients per full-time equivalent and the data around the resources of the company and the revenue tier and the number of full-time equivalents. So that's a great place to start is CECP's giving in numbers when you're looking at that data around employee size.
So I'm reading the question. I think I have it now. So giving by employees does not count in the statistics that we are sharing, but the match does count. So when we're talking about corporate giving, when employees give, it is not included in the total. That's their own giving. When the company matches it or the company gives on its own, that is what's being recorded as corporate giving. But workplace giving has other benefits, and it really does. It engages folks in the giving. It engages your employees in making a difference and doing something that matters. And match is a really important leverage for folks. They are much more likely to give when a company is also giving or matching. And how much you match makes a big difference. Sometimes companies will wait or employees will wait for different seasons of the year when they understand that their match will be doubled or their match will be full and not half. And those are all things that are becoming increasingly important as the power of the employee becomes number one.
If there are any other questions, please feel free to share them with us using the Q&A feature. If you are unable to access the Q&A feature, you can also use the chat. We can see that as well. And then, as Carolyn mentioned at the beginning, the Making the Case Toolkit can be found on our website. There's links to all of the data sources in there. There are a ton of great data sources, and we know that, you know, for many of you, it's about actually finding where to go to get that data. And so that was a big reason behind putting Making the Case together, is for us to help pull all of that data together in one source for you all to use and see and more readily find the information that you need. The slides from this presentation and the recording will be shared, as well as the toolkit that's available for download on our website. So you will have access to all of this information. And Sarah did just drop a link in the chat where we would like to hear your feedback on this presentation today and Making the Case Toolkit. It helps us improve our work, and your feedback, just a few minutes of your time, is very valuable to us, so please take that survey. If there are no other questions, we will end today's presentation. And actually, we have one more that came in, so I'm going to turn it back over to Carolyn.
Yeah, I'm just going to go back actually to the question about communications, Laura, and this is anecdotal, but through our job board, we do see each of the positions or many of the positions that are coming in. And what I would say is there are many, many more communications jobs now being published, companies recruiting for it, that are unique to CSR, or social impact. social impact communications jobs, whereas it used to be, sort of in a whole portfolio. I think companies are understanding that it's more and more of a specific discipline, and being able to tell that story in an impactful way and having experience telling that story in an impactful way is important. So a lot can be gleaned just by looking at that job board and what is out there in terms of the kinds of jobs or the way companies are behaving or the new hiring that is going on. So I hope that was helpful.
And actually, Carolyn, that reminded me of one other thing. In CECP's giving numbers, one of the things that is reflected in there is the most common departments that respondents reported to, and 28% of respondents indicated that they report to the communications or marketing department. So, as you were saying, that is something that we are seeing more related to CSR roles. With that, we will end today's presentation. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we hope you found this information valuable and useful to you as you move forward throughout the year and make the case for your social impact efforts with your companies. We look forward to seeing you at a future ACCP event and hope you have a great rest of your afternoon. Bye.
Thank you all so much. Bye-bye.